Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome students to another lecture of political leadership and communication. It's probably your 8th lecture by now, and I think we have almost covered most of the things regarding this course. Today's class will be mostly about why do we require election studies, or why is it important to conduct certain kind of surveys in order to analyze the voting behavior of the voters. It is important that it is not just carried out on a quantitative basis but also on a qualitative basis. Now it is very easy to say that probably why did people vote for this particular party. It could go on a guesswork, but that generally doesn't happen. In order to understand the voting behavior, not from the point of view of data, that how many people voted this time or how many candidates were there or what was the turnout of election this time, it is important that we basically require an in-depth study of how voting behavior is framed. Now, why are we studying this particular lecture in this course is because in order to analyze that what and how things happen in order that the political parties change their manifestos or they change their agendas, or how do they basically influence the voting behavior for their own benefit, as well as how can they bring about a change in the democratic processes. Okay, so it does not just go for particularly the political parties, as well as it is essential that we as citizens also see that how much involvement there is, or how much participation there is from the citizens in the decision making process or in the process of the government. So today's class is about understanding how political communication or political leadership happens through the study of election survey, or how are the surveys conducted, what are the kind of surveys which generally try to bring about the true picture of the voting behavior of people, and how do political parties basically frame their agendas, on what basis, and this is all done through surveys. Now, what kind of survey and what goes behind the survey is basically what we're going to study today. Okay, so let's begin the class by this lecture, which is on developing political communication and leadership through the survey of election, opinion poll and exit poll. Okay, now in order to understand political communication through surveys and opinion poll, it is important to study or analyze elections, which is even though located in the discipline of political science, but then all these studies are basically carried by analysts, they are carried by policy makers, they are carried by normal civil society, which take place in these collecting of data and sampling. Now, all this goes behind, and a collective of this study of how this elections happen, or the surveys happen, it comes under the discipline of something called psephology. Now, what is psephology? Psephology is basically the study of elections based on pretext data on voting, public opinion polls, for gauging the mood of voters, information on campaign finance and other available statistical data on elections. Okay, now if you have realized that there is a very famous personality called Prashant Kishore, who is basically an expert on gauging the elections, and before even the result is declared, he through his mathematical data can basically predict who will going to win the Lok Sabha elections or the state assembly elections. Okay, so that is basically how it is done, is what we are going to study today. Okay, now such election surveys are conducted by media and polling organizations all over the world to measure the popular mood of the voter during the elections. As I told you, that this is basically done to analyze why people are voting for a particular party, how has their behavior changed from the previous election to this current election, what is basically the agenda this time. Okay, so to find out issues that would be crucial in the elections, the voters' choice of political parties and leaders, and voting intentions of the electorates. Okay, the opinion polls do an in-depth and holistic measurement of voting behavior, and this particularly opinion of the electorates includes gains and losses for the political parties or the candidate in terms of the vote share and the winnability chances in the elections. Okay, so this is basically what is psephology? It's basically the study of elections. It is done in order to understand the voting behavior, and secondly, how political parties change their demands or the needs according to this voting behavior, and what particularly are their intentions behind it. The whether it is intention of the political party or the electorate is what basically psephology studies. Okay, the how and what of the election survey is what we're going to study. Basically, you must have heard about Election Commission. Okay, now Election Commission is an organization which conducts the elections across India, whether it is Lok Sabha elections, whether it is state assembly elections, or whether it is elections of the president. Okay, now that is one organization which is related with the elections. But when we talk about election survey, okay, now Election Commission also does survey, but it does survey on a very different connotation, whereas you have must have heard about this organization called National Survey of India. Okay, now this organization also conducts survey, particularly through a more qualitative data. Okay, where they basically gauge why voters have voted for a particular party this elections, or how much voter turnout was there, or in that particularly how much people were from the Dalit community, or what was the agenda of people of voting this time, or particularly what happened just previously in the elections, that the people's behavior changed, or what attitudes they have for the political parties now. All these qualitative analysis is done by the National Survey of India, and also they basically turn this into quantitative data in order to analyze that what the result of the survey is going to be. Okay, so particularly organizations like CSDS, now this is basically the Center for Studying of Developing Societies. Now this center also particularly measure voting behavior and attitudes in India in terms of carrying out surveys or interviews or opinion polls, okay, across India. Another such organization, as I told you, is National Election Study series based on post poll surveys conducted by Lokniti program. Okay, this is now also a part of your CSGS organization, which is called Lokniti, which does the surveys. It is the largest and the most comprehensive social scientific survey of Indian general elections and perhaps of any election in the world. Now this is basically, it carries out its survey on a broader scale, and till date it has proven its credibility till now. Okay, the next particularly National Election Survey treats elections as a window to capture the most accurate snapshot of the political behavior, attitudes and opinions of the Indian voters. Okay, now the last NES was conducted in 2009, which basically explored the awareness of people about the elections, the opinions of Indian citizens, and how the concerning topics like Indian economy or national security or democracy or diversity affected the voting behavior. Okay, so the purpose of conducting this election survey in India is one, as we discussed, that it is basically to measure the voting patterns and trends of the electorate. Second, their preferences and choices. Third, how the voters, which agenda or issues do they consider important, whether security is an important agenda, whether terrorism is an important agenda, whether economic growth is an important agenda. Okay, and last is the reasons for their participation and or non-participation in the elections. We've always seen that there are a lot of people who tend to not participate because according to them they have lost the trust, and that is why they think that whatever political parties are there currently in India, they are not able to secure the kind of development or their needs particularly. So generally a lot of people also vote on nota. There's an option where none of the above. Okay, so there are a lot of people who do that as well. So all these particularly these survey studies tend to emphasize on these topics more. Okay, As I told you about, the next topic is Election Commission. Now, what does Election Commission do? It is basically an organization. It's a constitutional organization of India, which basically, declares the results of the elections and gathers the data from all general elections, whether it is in Lok Sabha or state assembly elections held in India. The data are in public domain and the electronic copies of it are available on the official website. Now, this is very transparent body where you see that whatever the result of the election was, how many votes was given to which candidate, which particular party won, or from which political constituencies how many votes were being conducted and which candidate win. This is all very transparent and available on their website. Okay, so there is nothing or a kind of a discrepancy which can be done, though people comment that electronic machines are particularly hacked and they do not work properly, but election commissions from time to time have secured that that's not the case. Okay, so what how is election commission survey different from national survey or surveys which are carried by particularly CSDS organizations? How election commission survey is different from CSDS or National Election Survey as an organization which is Lok Niti also? So on what grounds the data which is presented between both these agencies differ is we going to see through the questions. Okay, now the kind of information which is available on election commission site is that one, the number of people who voted in the parliamentary or assembly elections, that is termed as a voter turnout. Okay, so how many people basically voted this parliamentary or assembly elections? Okay, second, they tell us that the list of candidates who contested the elections at the national, state level, or who was basically the winner, who was the second runner up, okay, and what percentage of the votes were polled by all candidates. That is, that if there are 4 candidates, there is a percentage of vote also told by election commission that which particular candidate got how many votes. Okay, third is the number of political parties that contested the elections. Now, you must have seen that whenever elections are about to happen, there are candidates who basically file for standing for the elections, and then the election commission goes about surveying that whether do they have any criminal records, or what is their background, or which political party they belong, if they are standing from an independent political party, that whether it is a regional party, whether it's a national party. Okay, so all this particularly, the number of political parties which are being contested is provided by the election commission. It also provides the number of candidates fielded by the parties and the number of candidates that won. Okay, that means that if BJP is letting say 10 candidates stands from different constituencies, how many candidates in its party basically won at that particular general elections. Okay, the next is that data on gender breakup of the candidates who contested and won the elections. Okay, so now we have a gender criteria here, that how many women who stood as the contestants won or not. Now, if you see that all these areas of concern of election commission are basically more of quantifiable data. Okay, that you can put a percentage on it. It could be denoted in mathematical terms. Okay, so it also provides information about the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and status of the candidates. It also archives affidavits filled by the candidates who contest the elections containing their particulars like judicial file cases, as I told you, property held by them. Now, you have to disclose all this before you even stand for as a candidate for the election. So, now this is basically what election commission as an organization discusses the issues about. It does not discusses the issues like how did the voter behavior changed, or what is the agenda this time, why did the people shift their lineage from a left-wing party to a right-wing party. Now, all this is not done by the election commission, but we'll see how it is done. Okay, so the questions which are related with the behavior and attitudes. Now, this is basically questions which mostly your CSDS organizations or National Election Survey carry out, and these questions differ from what the questions we discussed or the issues the election commission deals with. Okay, so the first is the voting behavior and attitudes of the electorates cannot be judged through census or election commission. Okay, why is that? What is important here is how to analyze the voting behavior. So questions like how people from different socio-economic and caste communities voted in the election. Second, whom did they vote or not vote, and why did they vote for a particular party or candidate. So as I told you, there is not just gender division, there is socio-economic and caste community division also, which basically analyze at which political party did they vote for, or even if they did, what was the reason behind it. Okay, next is that they also focus on the younger voter turnout, where basically we see that did the younger voter have different political preferences compared to the old. Okay, next, are most of the women voters guided by their husbands in taking their voting decision, and last is which election issue dominated the minds of the voters during a particular election. Now these are the questions which basically analyze the behavior or the attitudes of the voters rather than the technicality of the aspect, where what was the vote out turnout, or how many women voted, how many men voted, how many candidates were standing for the election. So the study of behavioral or contextual aspects of voting in India elections becomes important and relevant, as the answer to these can be found in an evidenced manner by conducting empirical election studies. Okay, so that is why the next thing to study is that this sample survey. How do we basically conduct surveys according to the sample study? Okay, it is a proper scientific method involved in conducting election surveys and forecasting elections. Now this is basically it is as scientific as social science could be, with various inherent limitations of analyzing human behavior, opinions and attitudes. Okay, now for example, it of course it is difficult to analyze human behavior. Why? Because it does not have certain kind of percentage of mathematical data provided with it. If I say that I voted for this particular party in this particular election, say party A, I voted for party A in 2016. Particularly now, the next thing would be that whom will I vote in 2021. Now, I could say that my lineage has shifted from that particular party A to party B, because party A was not able to secure certain kind of development. Okay, now I am voting for party B, but then it also turns out that party B did not actually do anything in their tenure also previously for development. But why am I shifting? So there's no correct answer sometimes given by the people or the voter turnout. It is just basic an analysis. Okay, but what happens is the kind of questions which are being asked, that determines particularly that what the result would be. Okay, so it is not that different questions are asked by different people. It is a set of a questionnaire which is generally given in sample surveys, and from those set of questionnaire which is given to different audiences, we are able to come out to a certain kind of conclusion. Now a very good example is another person called Yogendra Yadav, who talks about why there was a democratic upsurge in the third way of democracy. Okay, now he says that the first democratic upsurge happened when there was first general elections in India, that is in 1951 and 52. Why? Because everybody voted irrespective of which caste they belong. The age was 21, but then we know that particularly people got voting rights not because of whether they were educated or whether they had property, but everybody in India was allowed to vote. Okay, they were given the right to vote. Second upsurge happened with basically when you have the Congress I coming with Indira Gandhi. So that is when the second upsurge happened, and later in 1990s where you find globalization coming in. Okay, now these are basically the upsurge in democracy. When I talk about upsurge, they are basically talking about a very revolutionary shift which is being happening. Okay, now that is exactly 2014 also is regarded as a new democratic upsurge. Why? Because here you have middle class coming in, you have a different political party gaining ground to the extent that from coalition governments that used to exist in your 1970s, 80s and 90s, you have a full-fledged majoritarian form of a government being established. So then that is again a kind of a reason to judge why it happened. So for example, Yogendra Yadav, one of the leading political analysts in India, states that psephology is not a discipline, it's a science like microbiology. Psephology is nothing more than election studies, okay? Now basically it is just like any other science where your voting behavior and attitudes are basically measured on quantitative terms as well, okay? Case studies and observation studies do not use quantitative methods for studying elections. So voting behavior cannot be measured in certain terms, okay? So that is what I said, that sometimes what happens, your voting behavior is studied through sample surveys, studied through experiments, through interviews. So then it is difficult to quantify such data. Though psephology tries to quantify your voting behavior, but in certain situations it is difficult. So when we talk about studying voting behavior, it is not just about quantitative analysis, but it is also about the qualitative analysis, and we'll see how it is done, okay? Measuring voting behavior through survey study, okay? Now, how do we conduct a survey is very important. In order to conduct a reliable election survey, one needs to collect data from a scientifically selected sample of voters in which is basically a representative of all the voters. Hence, it is an important art to learn to collect electoral data from the representative sample derived from several core voters who may be geographically spread or nationally in particularly one state, okay? This often involves learning the art of data collection, okay? Now, what happens is that generally when the survey is carried, before you even conduct the survey, it is important to realize what the demography of that area is. That is, which all or what is the demography of the population, which is whether it is culturally heterogeneous, whether it is homogeneous, particularly which section of the society are we going to do the survey. For example, there are generally pilot surveys. Now, what is a pilot survey? It is basically before you even go physically and collect data, you tend to basically have a short survey of what kind of people particularly you're going to survey, okay? Whether it is a homogeneous group of particular one community, or whether it is heterogeneous group of different communities, or whether it is a northern state, whether it is a southern state. On those linguistic terms also sometimes these surveys are done, okay? So data particularly is collected in the form of a questionnaire design, which involves a lot of deliberations, discussion and pre-testing. It is not merely putting down a few lines and reading out those lines by way of asking questions to voters, okay? So first, your step is basically to analyze what is the geographical location you're going to do the survey. Second, it involves designing of questionnaire in order to collect the data. And third particularly is the way you are going to collect the data, okay? Now, the data is basically could be enormous and challenging. Why? Because it has been collected from different social, religious and linguistic diversity. So then in different situations, it demands flexibility in the method of data collection without losing onto the basic method, okay? Now, in areas particularly, you may also have some sensitive questions which people may not be willing to answer. So then it is, a good, there's a need particularly to take utmost care while you are actually, doing this survey through questionnaire. So you have to be very impromptu about it, adaptable to the situation. So while conducting or measuring voting behavior through survey, it is important to keep three things in mind: that what is your geographical location, what is the questionnaire you're going to design. Secondly, how you're going to collect data, whether you're going to make clusters, that is, you're going to take a particular population from a particular constituency, or you're going to pick it on the basis of gender or on the basis of age bracket. All this has to be done in order for you to conduct a survey, okay? So now let's see the practicality of it. How is it actually particularly done, okay? So before you, actually go on in doing a survey, there are certain techniques which needs to be kept in mind. One is that how are you going to do the sampling? Now, what is a sampling? Sampling is nothing but you're basically dividing the society on the basis of sample. Like in if I have to say in scientific terms, that you take genes from a boy, you take genes from the girl, and then you mix it in the form of X and Y chromosome, and then you probably have a genetically modified a baby. Okay, that happens in a scientific term. So what you do it, you take a sample from a particular gender, and then you took a sample from another gender and mixed it. Okay, so this is basically called sampling. Okay, that you pick up populations, or you pick up characteristics of a particular population, and you basically try to analyze those characteristics in bringing about what was the voting behavior. Okay, for example, if I have to analyze that what was the thing in 2017 that brought BJP in UP elections back, because since so many years BJP was out of particularly the state of UP. So what happened, or what was the reason why particularly you had BJP coming into power? Now if I have to carry out a survey on this, what I will do is basically I will try to pick up constituencies, which is geographical location. When I have picked up that, what I will do is I will probably from one constituency I will pick up a sample. Sample is the number of people. For example, I will say pick up 3 boys and 5 girls. Okay, and similarly I will pick elder peoples from another constituency. I will pick only males from one constituency. I will pick only females from one constituency. So these are all my samples from different constituencies, and then probably I will question them, because of course you cannot question so many people in India across the world. Okay, so then it is easy for you to pick up from samples and analyze. Second is I will design a questionnaire. Okay, what question do I need to basically ask? And third is I can also interview them on the basis of certain kind of qualitative analysis. Okay, now talking about sampling, how and what is sampling basically? It's talking about making a useful way of collecting the data to select a small subset of the population, as I told you, representative of the whole population. Okay, that you pick only a small amount of people from the population in order to test your particularly question. Okay, the key of good sampling are finding a way to give all, particularly nearly all population member the same chance of being selected, which is basically called probability sampling. Okay, now what is this probability sampling? For example, I made 10 chits and there are names of 10 people, and I will particularly pick up one chit. So the probability of these 10 people getting selected is equal. Why? Because anybody could be selected. What if from these particular chits I separate all the girls' name and I separate all the boys' name, and now I will only pick a boys' name? So then the probability of girls particularly being picked is 0. Okay, so this is called probability sampling, where you do not have any kind of biasness towards somebody, and there is basically randomly you are going to pick up the people. Okay, so that is called probability sampling. Okay, early surveys and polls often relied on samples of convenience or sampling from the list that excluded significant portions. Now that is what I said, that if you want a genuine survey, you will probably use probability sampling rather than the biasness. Okay, now for example, you want to forge a data that the voter turnout particularly was from the gender male more than the female, and you want to prove that yes, males voted more. Now this is a biasness which I have in mind, and I want to prove this. So what I will do, I will particularly only pick men from the society and particularly interview them in the sense to prove that yes, these particular people voted more than the girls. Why? Because now I have not even interviewed the girls, so there's a biasness, and I have for my own convenience I have only picked up the men of the society to interview. So this is basically called convenience sampling or non-probability sampling. Okay, so the third one particularly is the cluster sampling. It happens with the probability sampling as well, where particularly you build clusters. Now clusters could be from any homogeneous groups. Okay, For example, you have 5 boys in one cluster, 5 girls in one cluster, or probably you have people of age from 18 to 38 in one and 38 to 58 in another cluster. Now what you will do, rather than picking all from 18 to 28, you will pick say 50 of them, okay, and similarly from the other cluster you will also pick 50. So rather than picking up the whole cluster, you have just pinpointed few people, okay. Now it could be probability that you picked anybody, or it could be non-probability that you particularly chose and pinned somebody to interview, okay. So that is basically how sampling works. It is a part of your survey, okay. The next step is the question design, okay. So now how a question design should be framed in such a way particularly that it brings out the actual picture of what you want to study, okay. So if that is the case, earlier used to happen is that people used to go and just ask questions randomly or interviewed any random person from these population. So then what used to happen that in the end you had very varied data. Some would say that people belong to the Dalit class voted only for the political party which was supporting their needs, or you will have some people talking about no, they voted for the other party as well. So then when you do not have a structured questionnaire, then it becomes very difficult to come up with actual genuine answers, okay. So after 20th century it was seen that the questionnaire was designed in a very structured manner, and how it was done we will see, okay. It soon began to be apparent that sending an interviewer out with a set of questions, objectives without providing a specific wording for the questions produced important differences in the answers obtained, as I told you, okay. So the major advance in the question design in the last 20 years has been improved strategies for evaluating questions, okay. Now this is basically how a good questionnaire looks like in order to understand the voting behavior, okay. Now this is not just for any political party which carries out voting behavior surveys. It is also, for example, you are working in an organization and you want to carry out a survey where you want to see that how efficient are women of the society in that organization, and how efficient are men working in that organization, okay. So what you will do, you will prepare a particularly survey on the basis of one gender, okay, like the age, the male and female, and second you will divide on the basis of the age gap. So how would you do it? It is basically here, okay. First, a demographic information helps in understanding the area. Now this is basically done with regard to how you're going to carry out a survey based on understanding the elections, okay. But if you want to do that in an organization also, you can first divide particularly an age group, okay. The first is you divide on the basis of age group, then you divide on the basis of gender, then you divide on the basis of education, qualification, occupation, religion, caste and community, and the location, okay. So age group could basically be whether they are between 18 or 28, 28 or 38, and so on. Gender could be male, female, and if there is another gender, you can also put in a column about or do not want to mention, okay. Third is educational qualification, whether they belong from say working in corporates, whether they are retired people, whether they are students, okay. So you can put boxes and get a tick mark. This is a kind of a questionnaire, okay. Fourth is occupation, okay. In which sector do they work, whether they are teachers, whether they are doctors, whether they are engineer, or whether there's any other profession they carry, okay. Fifth is the religion. You can ask the religion, and please ensure that you always add another box particularly mentioning that what if they do not want to mention their religion, okay. Then you would in the initial phases only know that you do not have to ask questions which are related with their religion, okay. So this becomes a very good exercise when you're carrying any questionnaire like this or any survey like this, okay. Sixth is caste and community. You can ask them that whether you belong to the general class, whether you belong to the reserved category, or whether you are from the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe. And please again I'm mentioning that always have on the third column that whether they want to disclose it or not. So you can always have a column do not want to mention, okay. The last is a location, that is where particularly is their hometown, or whether why are they residing here or something like that, their geographical location, okay. So this could be particularly the beginning of your questionnaire. Okay. Section B particularly should be political awareness and participation. Okay, which basically means that you can have questions regarding, are you a registered voter? For example, there are a lot of people who are above the age of 18 but still are do not have their voting IDs. Okay, so then you can provide this data to the election commission that in this particular constituency there are certain people who have not even got their voting rights or have not got their voter ID. Okay, so that is the beneficiary thing about the surveys, that it tends to come up with certain kind of data. Okay, so you can always mention here that when I say, are you a registered voter, there could be blocks about yes, no, not filed. Okay, something like that. Now this all can be a part of your questionnaire. Similarly, if I say go on to the next one, that have you voted in the last elections, again you can have yes, no kind of a particularly boxes where they could fill in a tick. Okay, and if particularly they say no, we have not voted, then you can have a subsidiary answer to this or question to this particularly, that what was the reason. Okay, so now this is, while you are having a very fixed analysis of questionnaire, you can always get into analyze that what was the reason, that why did people not vote in the last election, what is because they were not satisfied with the government or any other reason. Okay, the next question is, do you want to vote in the upcoming elections? Okay, so again you can have yes, no, not interested kind of an options, where again you can ask that what is the reason. Okay, if it is yes, then what particularly would be your criteria of voting any particular party, or if no, then you can always ask them that what is the reason why they are not voting. Okay, next is, which level of elections do you usually vote in? Now you can always have in here that whether you vote for Lok Sabha, okay, whether you vote in particularly legislative. Okay, that is your state assembly elections. Okay, now if you have people saying that we generally vote in parliamentary elections, then you can always ask that why is legislative elections not important, or they do not trust, or something like this. Okay, next is, how interested are you in politics? Okay, now this is a very behavioral kind of a question, where you can get not just one or two responses, but it is a kind of a subjective question, where you will generally get different answers, but you can always analyze that why people are not interested in politics, or what could be the main reason. Okay, section C particularly is analyzing voting behavior and influences. So now you've got to the main aim of your survey. Okay, so you can ask questions, that is basically, what is important factor when choosing a candidate or a party? Okay, now these are the blocks which are given. You can always tell them that please fill in these blocks. Okay, that what is the most important factor when you basically choose your candidate or a party, or you vote on the basis of candidate, how close you are to your candidate of your constituency, or whether it is just the party you're voting. Okay, so but because generally what we have seen is that whenever we are asked this question, people generally say that we do not vote for our particular candidates from constituencies, but we generally vote for say Narendra Modi in parliamentary elections. He is the face of BJP, and that is why we vote for him. Okay, but any which way you can have all these options which are given here, whether it is development, infrastructure, whether it's according to the caste, religion, personal benefit, party ideology, or any one of them. Okay, next is, do you usually vote for the same party every time? Okay, so from this you can basically analyze that whether their loyalty is to one party, whether it depends upon the situation, or whether they are not sure of which political party they are going to vote. So you can always have these kind of behavioral questions, which will help you analyze how and why people vote for particularly a political party. Okay, next is, which source of information influences your voting decision the most, whether it is television that influences, whether newspapers. Now all these when are carried, you would realize that if your influencing is from your family or social media or public rallies, then particularly government will be focusing more on any one particular source of information more and would be investing in that more. Now generally today it is social media, so most of your political parties are trying to focus on social media, and this happens through all these surveys which are carried. It gives answers to the political parties as well as to the normal people to tell what and how, which source rather is influencing them. Okay, the next question is, do you think your vote can make a difference? Okay, now it could be yes, no, not sure, but of course you can always have an interview with them. The next question is, have you ever been influenced or pressured not to vote or vote in a particular way? Okay, sometimes it happens that the pressure is coming from your husband or your family. So you can always, if they are comfortable rather in answering, you can always answer them, because there's an option of saying prefer not to say. Okay, so do not force them when they pick up this third option. Okay, so this is basically a kind of a questionnaire, whether it is analyzing voting behavior, whether it is talking about sensitive voting questions, which is basically given here, that if elections were held tomorrow, which political party would you vote? So generally people are hesitant in saying that which party do they want to vote for. Okay, so then it is important particularly that you do not pressure them, and if they are picking prefer not to say, you do not basically force them to do that. Okay, the last question is, do you feel that the party you voted for the last time was able to fulfill your demands? Now people generally tend to mention that what their demands were and whether a political party actually promised those demands or not. Okay, so this is just a form of a questionnaire which is important, and this can be carried even if you are also a part of any particular survey analysis. Okay, the next method is interviewing. You can always interview through surveys. Interviewing is very very simple step, that whoever you are interviewing, you are recording that. One important thing you should keep in mind while using interview as your methodology is that you should first ask the person that whether the person is okay or fine in being recorded, and if not, then you should not use any recordings particularly which can be later used on. You can just hear the person and build up upon your particularly analysis about it. Okay, so please keep this thing in mind while you are conducting any interviews per se. Okay, next, which are critical issues with regard to the survey are in terms of sampling. There are certain critical issues which you should keep in mind. One is that the choice of whether or not to use probability sampling. Okay, now for example, in certain cases we see that probability sampling doesn't work. If I have to see that what the government has done for the tribes in northeast region, then I would particularly pick up the tribal population only as my sample. I would not pick up the general population. So here there is no probability sampling. Okay, here there is a purpose sampling. Why? Because that is a kind of research you want to carry on, particularly on the say scheduled tribes of that area. Okay, so the choice of whether or not you should use a probability sampling is very, very important. Second is the sample frame. Okay, those people who actually have a chance to be sampled is basically whether they particularly are in the frame or not. When I say that they are in the frame or not, they are basically if for example I have to conduct a survey, say UP elections, and I want to pick up the women of that state. Okay, so now my sample frame, okay, that the people who are in my sample are mostly women. Okay, but I know, or probably through the pilot search I have found out that particularly the reason why BJP won in UP was because of Muslim vote. So now I will not choose women in general, but basically I will choose Muslim women particularly. So that is my sample frame. Okay, third is the size of the sample. Okay, what is the size? How if your analysis requires you to basically collect a sample of say 20,000 20,000 people and you are just trying to collect it by, say, for your own convenience by 10,000, then there would be discrepancy or the credibility in your particularly analysis. Okay, the next is the sample design, the particular strategy used for sampling people or the household. Okay, what is your design, what is your strategy, whether it is questionnaire, whether it's through interviews. Okay, it depends. The rate of response, the percentage of those sampled for whom data are actually collected. Okay, now sometimes it happens is that whenever you're carrying out a sampling, sometimes you do not find those people very readily available to basically interview them or provide them with questionnaire. They are not ready to give you answers. Okay, so then it is very important that what was the rate of your response. If the response is good, only then you can come up with the actual analysis. Okay, in terms of the question design, what you need to keep in mind, as I also showed you an example of how a questionnaire should look like, the researcher must decide the extent to which the previous literature regarding the reliability and the validity of questions should be drawn up. So, you know how valid your questions are depending upon your analysis. Use of consultants who are experts in question design. Of course, you can always use consultants who are good in designing questionnaire. Okay, with respect to interviews, researchers have choices to make, the amount and the kind of training and supervision to be given. Okay, so in terms of interviews, as I told you, there are certain kind of training which is required, because while interviewing you have to sometimes show some kind of empathy, you have to show some time of emotions at the time of interviewing. So it depends on how well you are being trained. Okay, next is a decision, cutting across all these areas is the mode of data collection. How do you collect data? Whether the researcher will collect data by telephone or by mail, by personal interviews is very, very important, because sometimes if you are doing it on the internet through Google form, then there are high chances that people might not take that seriously and just fill up anything. Okay, the decision about which mode of data collection to use has important cost and implications and affect the quality of the data that will be collected. As I told you, if it is through personal interview, there are less chances of any influencing or manipulation happening or the validity of the data. But if you collect on the internet, there are chances that people might Google certain things up, or they might not respond properly, or it could be vice versa. Okay, but again, it depends on what is the mode of a data collection and how the validity of it would depend on that. Okay, so these pieces taken together constitute what is called a total survey design. Okay, now what I have just explained to you is basically one, that when we talk about political leadership and communication, why election study, or why survey study, or why data collection or exit poll analysis is important, because one, it tells you about what is the agenda of the voters this time. Okay, and if that is the, say, development is the agenda, then that becomes particularly the manifesto of political parties and they would work for it. So then in this case, the people becomes the you can say a kind of very important element in the decision making as well. Okay, they are the catalyst which basically government uses to analyze particularly that what the voters want and in which direction should we work upon. Okay, so that is why it is important that we study election survey, we carry out these surveys, we basically study the voting behavior based on these survey. Okay, so what I have explained you today particularly basically covers not just why it is important to carry election survey, but how it is done. Okay, what is the science behind it. Okay, so survey studies are basically done on the basis of designing a sample, as I told you, as I gave you examples about if you're you want to have an analysis of how many people from the Dalit community voted, then you will particularly pick up all the voters which have voted from different constituencies. If you want to see how many women have voted this time, you will pick up women particularly, and in that also you can do a sampling. Okay, so sampling is very, very important. this is just a quick analysis of what we have studied. One is your sampling, whether it is probability sampling, whether it is cluster sampling, whether it's non-probability sampling. It depends upon the situation, okay, and you should keep that in mind. Second was particularly your questionnaire design, or how the questionnaire is designed, okay. So then it is important that when the questionnaire is designed, what are the components you are using in it, okay. The age bracket, as I told you, the gender divide, as I told you, okay, or the occupation, the religion, the caste, the community in which they belong. Now, if you basically know that you're going to say carry out this survey through questionnaire in a community where you will only find people from the Dalit community, then probably you can avoid this question about which caste you belong to, because then sometimes people do not want to disclose it, okay. And I keep reminding you this again and again, that it is very important that while carrying out the survey, you should keep in mind that what is the analysis of it, or what is the output of it, okay, or how sensitive is that area where you are basically trying to take these interviews or questionnaires or whatever, okay. So while designing a questionnaire, please keep in mind all these things. Also, just for a quick revision, I would like to go back to, for example, the section C of the questionnaire, which is the voting behavior influences. Now, please keep in mind that this is basically other questions which will tell you about the behavior of the people, and you can pick even one of them, say party ideologies, and have an interview in between. It's not that if you have gone on a survey and you have a questionnaire, you will stick to that questionnaire. You can also change your methodology into interviewing in between, but it should be on the basis of that it should help your study, it should help your survey. It should not be based on that you are just for the sake of having an interview or doing it. So you can pick say party ideology, or which ideology do they believe in. And if they do not even understand this option, you can always have a quick informative knowledge with them. The next was the usually whether the people vote for the same party or not. Now you can always have a subsidiary questions by asking that do you think that these particular party you vote always have actually helped you, or what was the reason why you have voted for this particular party, what changed particularly your orientation from this. So all these are subsidiary questions you can always attach whenever you are trying to analyze the voting behavior. Why? Because these are all behavioral questions, okay. Also, when I talked about the source of information which influences your voting decision. Now, if you remember, while we were basically, talking about in the previous lectures that, government uses agenda setting, media framing, all these particularly for, designing how their manifesto is, or basically influencing the people. So then this is here where the, crux lies, that what is the source, okay. Now, generally it is regarded as social media, but sometimes what happens is that it changes. Sometimes even political rallies and speeches are also very, very important, okay. When in areas it was seen that when a political leader goes to the houses by himself or herself, it leads to much more popularization of political parties than by social media. But it is important to know that where this happened, okay, whether it was urban area, whether it was rural area. All these things should be kept in mind when you are even conducting these surveys, okay. The next is, do you think your vote can make a difference? Now, this is basically a kind of a question where you might have, mixed answers. Sometimes you might feel that, people are saying both yes or no. Now, in that circumstances, you can always go and ask them that, why do you feel so? Why do you think so? Okay. Next, particularly, have you ever been influenced or pressurized not to vote or vote in a particular way? Okay, now this, pressurizing could come from particularly your family members, as I told you. And if that's the case, you can always have an informal communication if people are not willing to answer, that what was the reason why it did not happen, or particularly if they are unwilling to discuss with you, you can always change the topic to that do you go out for work, or particularly how independent are you, and then you can probably come up with the question again. But that requires certain kind of skill in order to judge whether the person is comfortable in answering all these questions or not. Okay, so again, when I'm talking about this questionnaire, it is very important that you keep certain things in mind while actually carrying out these surveys. Okay, of course, sensitive voting questions is important, and I told you that there should be a field investigator particularly, which ensures the respondent's privacy. Okay, ask this only in a non pressurizing or discreet manner. As I told you, there are certain questions which you should not pressure on the respondent, or particularly if you feel that the respondent is not responding to you, you can always have, say, focus group studies, where you can circulate this idea among say 10 or 12 people sitting, that and this generally happens in rural areas, that when you go for this survey, you can always call on people, and you can have an informal communication, and always circulate this question, say what if tomorrow is the election, or whom do you think that this time is which person is going to win, or which political party is going to win. So then you can have a mix of answers. It would definitely not mean any particular person, but then you can analyze from those answers that where is that inclination lying towards. Okay, also, that do you feel the political party you voted for the last time was able to fulfill the demands of the society. Okay, now this is also kind of a question where you might find people not answering. Okay, so then you can always have certain kind of focus group studies. Okay, so this is basically all understanding what and how political behavior of people change over the period of time. Okay, now having said that, particularly whether it is about question design, whether it is about interviews, and all that, it is important that whenever you carry out certain kind of surveys or election studies, you should always keep this in mind, that which particular survey or which particular methodology of survey would suit your study, particular your analyze your study. Okay, so I think this should be more than suffice for you to understand that what, how and what of election studies happen, what is the psephology particularly behind that people are able to predict that which political party is going to win, or what is the voting behavior of the people, and on those basis even the political parties design their course of actions. Okay, and also vice versa, as I told you, that people are participative in the democratic process, because it is their demands carry brought in front of the political parties through these survey. And I think they should basically be able to help you understand this, whole course as to how and why it is important to carry out election studies in order to understand the voting behavior, because that forms the very basis of your political leadership and communication. On these basis only, you basically transform your communicative skills or your leadership skills. Okay, so I think that's it for today. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to this piece of literary snippet. We usually know William Shakespeare as the most revered figure in the history of English literature. But we often tend to forget that he has also been one of the most hated figures in literature. And here I'm not talking only about those boys and girls who have to memorize long sections from Macbeth or King Lear or Julius Caesar before they can go and sit for their school or college exams. But I'm also talking about people who are themselves quite famous authors. Tolstoy, for instance, considered the writings of Shakespeare to be, and I quote, crude, immoral, vulgar, and senseless. George Bernard Shaw absolutely loathed Shakespeare, as he did Homer. But perhaps no other criticism about Shakespeare is more damaging than the one which says that Shakespeare is a marvelous storyteller, provided someone has told him the story earlier. Now, this piece of criticism is particularly damaging because it is true. None of Shakespeare's plays contain any original story whatsoever. They are all written using pre-existing materials, pre-existing stories. Now, does that diminish the stature of Shakespeare as a dramatist? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. See you in the next episode of Literary Snippets.